Hello, welcome to the screencast where I'll be discussing the functional anatomy of the heart. This is going to be part one of two. And so by the end of this little quick part here, you should be able to identify and describe the components and the purpose of the cardiovascular system, the location and the relative size of the heart, be able to identify and describe the protective or connective tissue membranes of and around the heart. And then in general here, describe not in general, specifically describe the flow of the blood through the pulmonary circuit and through the systemic circuit. So the heart is the pump of the cardiovascular system, and its main role is, of course, to move blood through the blood vessels to bring that blood into contact with every single cell in the body. So the heart is located here in the thorax. It is protected by the ribs laterally, and it's protected by the sternum anteriorly. And lateral to the heart, of course, are the lungs. So in this image here, these retractors are sort of pulling the lungs back a little bit to expose then where the heart is. Now the heart is about roughly the size of, if you take your fist and you wrap your other hand around that fist, it's somewhere in between those two sizes of like just your fist and then your fist with your other hand wrapped around it. And it is very roughly, pyramidal shaped, triangular shape, where the point here is known as the apex, and that is tilted to the left, and the heart is sort of rotated anteriorly a little bit. Then this thicker, wider part here is known as the base. Okay, the heart is in its own protective connective tissue layers, and there are two layers there. They are both referred to as the pericardium. The parietal pericardium is closer to the wall, so that would be closer to the lungs there. And then the visceral pericardium, which is actually not labeled on here. The visceral pericardium is going to be right on the top of the heart. So if we had the heart here, we'd have the visceral pericardium, and then there would be a little space, and then we'd have the parietal pericardium. Okay. And in between those two connective tissue membranes, there would be fluid, and that fluid is known as the pericardial fluid. Pericardial fluid. So since these membranes are not open to the outside world, but they are secreting a fluid, they are known as serous membranes. Right? Contrast that with mucous membranes, which are secreting a fluid but are then open to the outside world, as is those that line the nasal cavity, digestive cavity, and reproductive cavities. Right? So these are serous membranes. There's a little bit of fluid in there, that pericardial fluid. Right? So if we take a little bit of a detail, actually before we move on here, we have a transverse section here, and so this shows you how the heart here is in between the two lungs, okay? Or is medial to the lungs anyway. So here's an up-close view. We're going to take a section from the base of the heart there, and we're going to look at this the pericardium and then the myocardium. So the pericardium are the two connective tissue membranes, and then the myocardium, this myo is muscle, right? And so you have the cardiac myocardium is sometimes what it is referred to as. So the cardiac, cardiac myocardium, or muscle of the heart. That's the cardium part. So if we go over to this image here, again, we see the myocardium is right here, and we're looking at the outside protective membrane here. The epicardium is also known as the visceral layer, right, of the serous pericardium. Right, so here's the one that sits right on top of the heart there, and then you see that is kind of continuous with this, right, which is the parietal layer of the serous, or the pericardium there. So in between there is the pericardial cavity. This space right here is the pericardial cavity, which is, of course, filled with pericardial fluid. Now, if you get an infection in here, God forbid, there's going to be a swelling there, and the swelling would be a pericarditis, or an inflammation of the pericardial membranes. That, of course, could put pressure on the heart and affect its ability to pump blood throughout the body. Right? Before we move on here, we also want to point out that the heart is a hollowed out organ. There are chambers where the blood is going to be, and those chambers, the blood that's in there is separate from the myocardial muscle, right? And it is separated by an endocardium here, which is another connective tissue membrane that is impermeable to any of the blood that is in this chamber. And these chambers it's either going to be an atrium or a ventricle. So even though there is blood in here, which is either going to be O2 rich or O2 rich or O2 poor, even if it's O2 rich, oxygen is not going to be able to cross this endocardium right here. Right? This endocardium then becomes continuous actually with the blood vessels as it leaves the heart, and we'll look at that in another screencast, the anatomy of the blood vessels. Okay, so please review here the structure of the heart wall, the myocardium, the protective connective tissue layers on the outside, as well as the connective tissue layers that line the cavities. Now, as a pump, the heart is essentially located right here, and another screencast after this, the anatomy, functional anatomy 2, we'll look at the blood flow through the heart, but the heart is going to be pumping blood to two circuits. Right? There is a pulmonary circuit where the blood is going to and from the lungs, and then the systemic circuit, which is going to and from all other organs and cells and tissues of the body. Okay? Now, the pulmonary circuit is the blood is pumped into that circuit by the right ventricle. So the right ventricle of the heart pumps blood into that pulmonary circuit, and the left ventricle of the heart will pump blood into the systemic circuit. Now, based on what you know about the location of the heart and the location of the lungs, and which side would you say is a stronger pump? Would the right ventricle be a stronger pump, or would the left ventricle be a stronger pump, given that where the heart is in relation to the lungs? If you said that the left ventricle is the stronger pump, you would be correct. It has to pump blood to the entire rest of the body, all the way up to the head, down to the toes. Right? So up here, all the way down the arms, all the way down the arms, all the way down the legs, all the way down the legs, and then back up here. So this left side of the heart is a much stronger pump, and consequently, when we look at the anatomy in the next one, this left ventricle, the muscle, the myocardium of the left ventricle is going to be much thicker than it is on the right side. Right? So if you just pause here and take a look here, let's walk our way just through the circuits. Let's look at this right side. So we'll start here in this right ventricle. Now when that right ventricle contracts, it's going to squeeze blood out here, and it's going to go to the lungs, and at the lungs the blood picks up oxygen and then returns actually to the left side of the heart. From this left side of the heart, then that oxygenated blood is pumped out to the entire rest of the body into the systemic circuit, and then oxygen is dumped off at those cells and tissues, carbon dioxide is picked up, and then that deoxygenated blood is actually returned to the right side of the heart, where it is then pumped back into the where it's pumped then back into the pulmonary circuit. Okay, so there's two circuits, two sides of the heart, the left side and the right side. The left side is pumping, responsible for pumping blood through the systemic circuit, and the right side of the heart, the right ventricle, is responsible for pumping blood into that pulmonary circuit and back to the left side of the heart. Okay, so it might benefit you to obviously summarize this again. So we have right side to the pulmonary circuit, and then that pulmonary circuit returns back to the left side of the heart, and then from the left side of the heart, that blood is pumped into the systemic circuit, which then returns to the right side of the heart. From the right side of the heart is pumped back into the pulmonary, and so you get this cycle happening over and over again. So there's no real one place to begin, and just pick a spot and then get yourself back to that spot again. Okay? So you should be able to, of course, the components and the purpose of the cardiovascular system, identify and describe those. The location, the size of the heart, talk a little bit about the protective connective tissue membranes of the heart, both the ones on the outside and the inside lining the chambers. And then finally be able to describe the blood flow through the pulmonary circuit and then into the systemic circuit. Okay? Thanks for watching. If you have questions, bring them to class.